April 16, 1945. The final assault on Nazi Germany begins. As dawn breaks over the Oder River, more than 2 million Soviet soldiers unleash a hellish barrage on German defenses. Artillery thunder shakes the ground for miles. It is the largest offensive operation of World War II. The Battle of Berlin has officially begun. Before we dive into these intense final days of Hitler's regime, make sure to subscribe, like, and share this documentary if you want more real-time breakdowns of history's turning points. Your support helps preserve the truth in a world often lost in noise. Now, let's return to the battlefield. The Red Army's 1st Belarusian Front, commanded by Marshal Georgy Zhukov, surges across the Oder toward Silo Heights. Stalin is growing impatient. He wants Berlin before the Western Allies reach it. Zhukov's forces face stiff resistance from General Gotthard Heinrichs's Army Group Vistula, which has fortified the Silo Heights with minefields, anti-tank ditches, and dense fog machines. The Soviets are halted longer than expected. Losses are severe. To the south, Marshal Ivan Konev's 1st Ukrainian Front makes faster progress. His troops storm through Saxony and link up with Polish units. Unlike Zhukov's frontal assault, Konev's southern approach bypasses major defenses, moving toward Berlin from the southwest. Inside the city, chaos begins to consume the Nazi leadership. Hitler, isolated in the Führerbunker beneath the Reich Chancellery, refuses to evacuate. He still believes in fantasy armies, ghost divisions, and the power of Fortress Berlin. His generals know the truth: the Reich is collapsing. On April 20th, Hitler's 56th birthday, Berlin comes under direct Soviet artillery fire for the first time. Gifted with destruction rather than celebration, the city burns. Goebbels gives Hitler a bizarre birthday party underground, while children above ground prepare for battle with Panzerfausts and hopeless courage. The Soviet advance tightens. Zhukov finally breaks through the Silo Heights on April 19 after 3 days of brutal combat. German lines collapse. Refugees clog every road westward. Hitler refuses to allow civilians to evacuate, fearing it would demoralize the troops. April 23 sees Berlin officially encircled. Soviet tank columns penetrate the suburbs. The final battle is no longer looming, it has begun within the city limits. Berliners dig trenches in parks, while Volkssturm units, old men and teenage boys, brace for urban warfare. Every building becomes a fortress. Every street, a battlefield. As April 25 arrives, Soviet forces from Zhukov and Konev's fronts link up at Kietzen on the Elbe River. Berlin is now cut off. Western Allied forces are halted miles away, per orders from Eisenhower. This is Stalin's prize, and he intends to claim it with blood. With the capital surrounded and all exits sealed, the Nazi regime has only days left to live. Hitler, still deluded, orders non-existent units to counterattack. But nothing is coming. April 26, 1945. Berlin is fully encircled. Soviet artillery rains down without pause, day and night. Smoke cloaks the skyline. Entire districts are reduced to rubble. The civilian population, trapped inside the burning carcass of their capital, faces not only bombardment but starvation, terror, and despair. The apocalypse is not metaphorical, it's real, unfolding street by street. Marshal Zhukov and Marshal Konev now squeeze the city from the east and south. Soviet infantry fights house to house, often floor by floor, as German defenders resist with fanatical desperation. Hitler has declared Berlin a fortress, and orders every able-bodied man to fight. Boys from the Hitler Youth and Volkssturm pensioners are sent to ambush tanks with Panzerfausts. They are no match for experienced Red Army units backed by T-34s and Katyusha rocket launchers. Hospitals are overwhelmed. Water and electricity have failed. Berliners fill bathtubs in anticipation of losing running water permanently. The once proud boulevards of the Reich capital are reduced to makeshift trenches and flaming debris. Survivors emerge from cellars only to collect their dead. In the Führerbunker, Hitler's detachment from reality deepens. He accuses his generals of betrayal. When he learns that SS General Felix Steiner has not launched the impossible counterattack he ordered, Hitler flies into a rage on April 27. He finally admits, the war is lost. Yet he refuses to surrender. Instead, he begins discussing suicide with those closest to him, including Eva Braun, his longtime companion, now present in the bunker. Meanwhile, Goebbels and Martin Bormann remain at Hitler's side, drafting political statements, fantasies of a German phoenix rising from these ashes. The truth is that thousands are dying each day, and Berlin is collapsing block by block. Soviet troops reach the Tiergarten and capture several key junctions near the Reichstag. The city's landmarks are no longer symbols of national pride, they are just shells. Hitler orders bridges blown, tunnels flooded, even though civilians are still using them to flee or seek shelter. On April 28, news arrives in the bunker that Heinrich Himmler, once the most loyal of Nazis, is negotiating with the Western Allies. Hitler sees this as high treason. In a final purge, he orders Himmler stripped of all authority. That same night, he hastily marries Eva Braun in the bunker's dim corridors. It is an act of symbolism, not salvation. Outside, Soviet forces capture Tempelhof Airport and begin pushing toward the Reich Chancellery itself. Berlin's inner core is now under direct assault. The final stand has begun, but it is a stand without hope. The Red Army prepares for the last blow, the storming of the Reichstag. April 29, 1945. The heart of Hitler's empire is now just a smoking ruin. Soviet troops close in on the symbolic center of Nazi power, the Reichstag. Once the seat of German democracy, it had long stood empty during Hitler's rule. Now, it becomes the final battleground, a target of immense propaganda value for Stalin and a symbol of Germany's total collapse. Throughout the night of the 28th and into the morning of the 29th, Red Army units, led by the 150th and 171st Rifle Divisions, inch their way through the last defenses around the Tiergarten and Brandenburg Gate. Barricades, snipers, and suicide squads slow the Soviet advance, but nothing stops it. By midday, the fighting is brutal, up close, and savage. Machine guns echo through broken hallways. Grenades detonate in stairwells. Entire floors collapse from shelling. Germans make their final stand inside government buildings, defending offices with sandbags and Molotov cocktails. Some are merely civilians with rifles, shopkeepers, clerks, old men, now entrenched as the last line of defense. Meanwhile, inside the Führerbunker, Hitler is preparing for death. After dictating his political will and a personal testament, he bids farewell to his remaining staff. Eva Braun remains with him, refusing to leave. Their marriage, barely a day old, becomes a tragic pact of mutual suicide. On the afternoon of April 30th, at precisely 3:30 p.m., the silence in the bunker is broken. Hitler and Eva Braun are dead. Cyanide and a pistol. Their bodies are quickly carried out, doused in petrol, and burned in the garden behind the chancellery, just as he had ordered. Above ground, the Reichstag comes under direct assault. Soviet artillery pummels it for hours before the infantry moves in. What remains inside is a maze of flames, debris, and resistance. The battle lasts all day. German defenders refuse to surrender, even as their world disintegrates around them. At 10:40 p.m., Sergeant Mikhail Minin of the Red Army's 150th Division reaches the roof and hoists the Soviet flag. But it isn't until the early hours of May 1st that the famous photograph, the one the world would come to recognize, would be staged and captured. The image becomes an enduring symbol, the Soviet Union triumphant over fascism. Back in the bunker, Joseph Goebbels takes command for a brief, delusional moment. But even he knows the end is near. The command structure of the Third Reich has all but collapsed. Communications are broken, units are surrounded, and the remaining Nazi leaders are scrambling for exits that no longer exist. The Thousand-Year Reich is now hours away from total extinction. The morning of May 1, 1945, dawns over a city in ruin. Smoke clings to Berlin's skeletal skyline. The thunder of artillery has become background noise, but inside the Führerbunker, a deafening silence follows Hitler's suicide. His death, once unthinkable to his loyal circle, is now confirmed. The man who started a war that engulfed the world is gone, but the killing hasn't stopped. Joseph Goebbels, now nominally chancellor under Hitler's last will, refuses any notion of surrender. Driven by fanaticism, he issues vague orders to continue the defense, despite knowing it is futile. Around him, the remaining Nazi leadership disintegrates. Fear, paranoia, and betrayal seep into every corridor. Some try to flee the city. Others plan their own deaths. At 1 p.m., the Red Army sends an envoy to the bunker with a demand for unconditional surrender. The Germans respond with stalling tactics, insisting on negotiations. But Stalin is done with negotiations. He wants total surrender, signed and sealed in Berlin. Meanwhile, the Soviets continue pushing through the last Nazi strongholds. Fighting in the Spandau district is fierce. Waffen-SS units, many composed of foreign volunteers from France, Norway, and the Baltics, fight with blind fanaticism. But their defense is suicidal. Red Army tanks smash through barricades and infantry clear the ruins block by block. Civilians caught in the middle are either casualties or spectators to the end of the Reich. As night falls, a series of tragic decisions unfold. Goebbels and his wife, Magda, poison their 6 children inside the bunker. Later, they walk outside and commit suicide together. Their bodies are burned, but unlike Hitler's, they are not completely consumed. Soviet troops will find the remains the next day. On the same night, General Hans Krebs, representing what remains of the German High Command, meets with Soviet General Vasily Chukov. Krebs tries to bargain, but with no authority to surrender and no leader to defer to, the talks break down. Elsewhere in the city, entire German units begin laying down arms. Soviet soldiers collect thousands of prisoners, including remnants of the Hitler Youth, Volkssturm, and even officers from elite SS divisions. Surrender is no longer dishonor, it is survival. By the early hours of May 2, the situation is irreversible. Soviet forces have taken nearly all key government buildings. The chancellery is in ruins. The Tiergarten is under full Soviet control. The Reichstag flies the red banner. At 3 a.m., General Helmuth Weidling, commander of Berlin's defenses, finally issues the official order: all German troops are to cease fire. The order spreads through the city like a dying breath. By sunrise, resistance collapses. At 1 p.m., General Weidling personally surrenders Berlin to Marshal Zhukov. The city has fallen. As the echoes of gunfire fade across Berlin on the morning of May 3, 1945, the Soviet Union declares the city secure. What remains is a battered capital, a ghost of stone and ash. The once proud Reich is no more. Stalin soldiers now patrol the streets once marched by Hitler's armies. A war that began in fire ends in cold silence. Inside the Reichstag, now draped in Soviet flags and graffiti, victory is symbolized not just by banners, but by the blood paid for every brick. Thousands of Red Army soldiers perished in the fight for Berlin. Their commanders are quick to immortalize the conquest. War photographers capture staged moments of flag-raising and victory salutes, while teams sweep the city for war trophies, Nazi documents, and the bodies of the regime's fallen elite. But victory does not mean peace. The humanitarian crisis within Berlin becomes apparent. Over 2 million civilians, many of them women, children, and the elderly, now live in a city without order. Food is scarce, infrastructure is shattered, and the Red Army's occupation, marked in some areas by widespread looting and violence, introduces a new form of suffering. On May 4, surviving members of the Nazi government attempt to regroup in Flensburg, near the Danish border. Admiral Karl Donitz, appointed Hitler's successor, forms a short-lived government. But the Allies reject any notion of a conditional surrender. The world demands total capitulation, not just the fall of Berlin. Between May 5 and 7, German military leaders across Europe surrender piecemeal. In the Netherlands, Denmark, and northern Germany, Field Marshal Montgomery accepts surrenders from German forces. In Italy, General Heinrich von Weidinghoff signs an unconditional surrender. The collapse is comprehensive. On May 7, in Reims, France, German General Alfred Jodl signs the unconditional surrender of all German forces to the Western Allies. But Stalin, insisting on a more symbolic act, demands another ceremony in Berlin. Thus, on the night of May 8, in the Berlin suburb of Karlshorst, the final surrender is signed in the presence of Soviet, American, British, and French officers. Field Marshal Wilhelm Keitel, representing the German High Command, signs on behalf of the Nazi military. The ceremony lasts into the early hours of May 9. For the Soviet Union, May 9, 1945, becomes Victory Day, a date that will echo through Russian history. For the rest of Europe, May 8 marks the end of World War II in Europe. Berlin, however, will remain a city divided, scarred by the cost of ideology, war, and human ambition. The battle has ended, but the consequences are only beginning.